Hello everyone, thank you so much for coming today. Thank you for coming to LitFest and thank you for joining us for this wonderful session that we're going to have with Deena Mohamed, the author of Shubeik Lubeik, and also you might recognize her from her webcomic, Qahira, and Malaka Gharib, author of I Was Their American Dream, and it will, a little bit nervous, apologies, it won't always be like this, yes. So thank you so much for coming. Hi guys, how's it going?
Good.
It's a pleasure to be here with you today.
It's a pleasure to finally meet you after following you on Instagram for so long.
Likewise, I got the names. I was like, oh, it was such a wonderful, opportunity. To be honest, I'm very lucky I get to speak to you about your work. So, there are two things that I thought of instantly when I was told that we'd be having this session together. That there's always two parts to the creative process. There is the idea, and then how this idea gets fleshed out. So the concept, and then how it gets fleshed out in the process of it. So the first thing that I wanted to ask you guys is, when did it start? How did it start? Did you always know that you were going to write these novels, or were these like small seeds that eventually grew into these works?
Do you want to answer first?
I think I'll let you go first because I want to know.
Oh, all right. So as a teenager, I wrote in a diary. I wrote about my life, and I was writing about what I was feeling and what I was thinking at every moment. My dad is here in the audience, and he was always asking me, "What are you writing in that diary? Are you writing about us?" And I said, "Yes, obviously." Obviously writing about you. And so I think I always knew that I liked to write about myself and what was happening to me. And so when it was time to sit down and write a book, a book, of course the natural thing for me was to continue to write about myself. And I use writing as a way to answer questions. So for my first book, I Was Their American Dream, I wanted to answer the question, how do I feel about being Egyptian, Filipino, American? What are my emotions about being those three cultures? Do I feel one culture more than the other? Do I feel ashamed about one culture over the other? How has that evolved over time? And the second book, It Won't Always Be Like This, is the central question that I wanted to answer through my writing was, how did traveling to the Middle East every year since I was a kid, my dad lived in Cairo, so I would visit him every 1 or 2 years, how did that affect or change my worldview? At the time, I really didn't like I didn't like going to Egypt. I thought it was like really boring. Like, why do I gotta go? I have to sit there with my three siblings. But in the end, I learned from the writing process that, my dad put an extraordinary amount of effort into trying to help make me feel like a part of his family. And as a result, I've had incredible relationships with my three siblings in Egypt that continue to this day.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So my process was very different in that I did not like writing about myself. I did not like reflecting in any way. But actually, I started with comics in the opposite sense. I used to be very online. Instead of going anywhere, I was just always on the internet. And I started out with my webcomic that Nora mentioned, which was Qahira. And I used to do it sort of as a way to respond to things. So this was a very feminist and sort of opinionated comic that started when I was 18, because I was very opinionated then. And I was posting it online basically for my friends to see. So it was at the time on Tumblr, if any of you remember that website. And after posting it, it used to get around, lots of people would read it, and that got me more interested in comics. So I started doing my undergraduate design thesis on the history of Egyptian comics. And from working on it, it was a very sort of direct, political, confrontational comic, and it was kind of popular because people sort of like it when Arab women talk about feminism. So I wanted to I felt like it was a bit difficult to see if I was a comics artist from something like that. I wanted to know if I had the ability to actually make comics, because having read so many comics, I was really inspired, and I had this feeling that I wanted to see my work on a shelf, and I wanted to work in something fictional and something longer. So I started working on Shubeik Lubeik in Arabic. Actually, my main goal was just to sort of have a book on a shelf because I was working online. And so I was always posting it online. But it didn't feel real, almost. Like, it was like just me in my bedroom, and then I wanted to see if I could sort of make it in the, it's not a comics industry in Egypt, but it is like a little comics community, and I wanted to join in on them. So for me, it was mainly Cairo Comics, which is the Egyptian Comics Festival, which is a really great festival. And I would see like the artists there with their books every year, and I just really wanted to have a table and have a book. That was my goal. And then eventually the book would maybe be in a bookstore. So it was very...
And now it's everywhere in the world, translated to multiple languages.
Yes. It was very, a lot of luck was involved in this, because I think the way it ended up happening is that I was really trying to see if I could make a graphic novel succeed in Egypt. I wanted to get Egyptian readers to read graphic novels. I don't know if it's the same in Dubai, but most people don't read graphic novels because they think they're for children. A lot of people think they're for children, and at the same time, a lot of people just can't find them. They don't even know they exist. So I think my challenges were almost like, how can I write a fantasy story? Because I wanted to write a fantasy story. I wanted to do something that was a little bit far away from like political confrontational work. I wanted to just do fiction. And I was just thinking like, how can I get people to read this? Like what kind of, how do I get people to relate to it? So that was, I think, one of the challenges. It's unrelated to the idea, which was what you were asking about, but it is kind of part of my motivation for working on Shubeik Lubeik specifically.
I mean, it is, that's perfect. Both answers are perfect, especially that for you, it started with the webcomic, and then you wanted to create something of a longer format. And then for you, it started with writing your own, your thoughts and your memories in your journal. And I read in an article that it started off as just a 2-page comic, correct?
Yeah, it did. I started, well, a lot of my, actually, it's so interesting, but I was Their American Dream was just these like quick, like one-panel comic sketches that I would post on Instagram about indirect reaction to Donald Trump running for president and saying crazy stuff about Arab people. So I was drawing these like comics to course correct the narrative. So like Donald Trump would say, yeah, Muslims are terrorists, and I'd be like, no, they're not. Like my dad loves gardening. Like he's this like the opposite of what you might think. And then It Won't Always Be Like This was actually like an 8-page mini-zine about my stepmom and about my relationship with her when I first met her. And so those like ended up being fleshed out into full books.
And that's, I think it's a lot of times, especially when young comic artists or young illustrators, they go and they see these books, and you just imagine that whoever made it just set out to create this work, this novel, when actually sometimes, a lot of times, it starts with something a little bit smaller, and then it grows into what it is today. Which brings me to my next question, something that I was really, really eager to ask you guys. We live in a day and age where a lot of creatives and a lot of people who work in the creative industry, or not in the industry but work as comic artists and illustrators, we are expected to put out work consistently all the time and to get kind of instant gratification for the things that we do. How do you, let's say, I don't want to say push yourself, but how do you find the willingness to consistently work on something for a long period of time and not get discouraged halfway?
Sure, I can go first on that. I had the opposite problem, where I was posting Qahira, so it was a webcomic that would be posted. I had a limit of only 10 pages per post. And actually the instant feedback kind of made me more stressed. It was too much feedback, because first of all, you get too much feedback, and it's very valuable in a lot of ways. I was also really lucky because the comic, I was posting it in English and in Arabic, and it would spread in English somewhere and then in Arabic somewhere else. And so I was able to see so many different reactions to it. But the problem was that it made my process of thinking about it too related to posting it. So I was always thinking about who would be reading it, how they would be reading it, what would they be thinking about. And it was like every time I start thinking about writing, I'm like, okay, well, I can't use this word in Arabic because then the Arabic-speaking readers will think about this. And I can't use this word in English because English-speaking readers will assume this. To be fair, it was also very political. So, I mean, I kind of brought it on myself. But in many ways, it was, because it was so instant, it kind of made the artistic process more superficial to some extent. Not superficial, but it made my focus on how it would be received as opposed to what I wanted to say. And so that was partly the motivation for working on a novel, because I was like, I will focus on only one audience, which is the Egyptian audience. And my goal isn't really to convince anyone of anything, it's just to make sure that they understand the story. So it was focusing purely on telling a story and telling it well, so that the story reaches people. And I don't care if they like it, they can like it or dislike it, but I want them to read it and understand it. Which is actually kind of a challenge with comics, because if people don't read comics a lot, they don't really know how to read it. They almost like, they're like, I go from here to here, and like they almost read it as a joke at first, because when they see drawings, especially in Egypt, people assume like most comics are caricature or like humorous comics, so they don't know how seriously they should take it. I mean, with my graphic novel, when I was printing it, originally I was self-publishing it, when I was printing it at the shop, there was a guy who was printing like, I think, he was technically printing something he stole, but it's okay. It was like ملازم امتحانات وكده. He was photocopying them, but that's not important. The important thing is that he was like reading the book as it came out of the printer, and he was like, at first he was like reading it and laughing. He was like, oh, this is so good. And then he reached like a halfway point where it gets a little depressing. He was like, why is it so sad? So I think that was part of the challenge to sort of just work on something that people would understand. And I think one of the things I used to do is I would ask my grandmother to read it, because my grandmother reads a lot of books, but she doesn't read comics at all. So I just want to make sure it's readable by asking her to read it, and she can, if she understands it, then I know most people will understand it, and that at least the sequence of events are clear. So I think there's actually a benefit to working long term, that maybe if you are constantly posting and constantly thinking about feedback and likes and the success of everything you post, it can be really gratifying to take a step back and sort of focus on a single project for a while, in some aspects.
I love the grandmother test. I think that's a really good way to test whether people understand things. So when I'm doing a long-term project, I think of working on a book kind of like planning a wedding. You need to be so organized, so focused, and instead of budgeting money for a wedding, you're budgeting your time. So I have like a schedule of how many pages I need to finish in one day. So, and I also have a full-time job. I'm not a full-time cartoonist, right? I'm a journalist in the daytime. So at night, I know I have like from 8 p.m. to like 10 p.m. to draw, and I have to be like, that's the only energy that I have to be on. So I know that like, okay, I can finish like X amount of panels in this day. And so if I can draw at this rate, how many days will it take for me to finish? And then so I can sort of map out my schedule that way. The other thing I would say about drawing long-term projects is that if you don't take your work seriously, no one will. So like everyone's going to if you treat your work like a joke and you treat it not like your work, then no one is going to take your passion seriously. So when I say like I'm working on a book and I'm going to finish it in this amount of time and I'm very serious, I'm sorry I can't go out tonight, I really have to like work on this book, they'll be like, oh she's really serious about this thing. And I'm like, yeah dude, this is like a thing, it's a project, I got to get it done.
I mean, if it helps in contrast, it is my full-time job, and it's just as stressful in the same way. You also have to take it seriously, because it is, whether it's full-time or part-time, it is like independent work. Yeah. So no one's like coming after you, unlike like short-term commissions where someone will be like, where's the thing? Publishers kind of just leave you. They'll remember it 6-7 months, they'll be like, weren't you working on something? Like that's usually the reaction they have. So I think it always comes down to you having to sort of put your own deadlines. And I do the opposite, because I work better when I'm around people. So I just take my iPad. I work sometimes on my iPad Pro. So I'll like take it when I go out with my friends, when I go out anywhere, on a train, on a plane, I'll be working. But I also structure my work so that the part where I don't use my brain, which is like the inking and the coloring, that's what I do outside.
That's really smart.
It works, it really works. Yeah. Whereas the part where you're writing and sketching and thinking is already done at the beginning. So that's the part you really need to focus for.
That's right.
These are incredible tips.
We know you're working on a book, Nora.
Huh?
Nora's also working on a comic book, so we're trying to give her as much advice as we can.
That question was slightly selfishly motivated. I was like, these two amazing women got books on shelves, and I'm supposed to get one eventually out in a few months.
That's so exciting. What's it about?
It's about an old house in Cairo, and I wrote the script, and I'm illustrating, and halfway through, I was like, this is taking so long. And then while you're writing the script, and that's another question I actually wanted to ask you guys, because so obviously I imagine you write first, and then you illustrate, correct?
Well, in my first book, I didn't know that. And so I was drawing as I went, and I'm like, my hand hurts. I ended up getting carpal tunnel syndrome because I was trying to figure it out as I was drawing, and that's not right. You should write it first and figure out what you're trying to say and then draw.
Been there.
I didn't know that.
And have you guys ever had to, after you finished writing and you've gotten it approved in your head, like, "Khalas, this is the last draft," have you ever had to change it while you're illustrating?
Yes, that's a fundamental part of making comics. Like the thing is, like, so I mean I do it in a slightly more structured way where I will write the outline. Actually, I brought this specifically to explain. So this is where I sort of plan out my work, my projects. So I have like I think part 3 in this. Oh, let me try and find some stuff for you guys. So. It's slightly different when you're working on your own. You write and you draw for yourself. So sometimes if you work with a writer or you work with another artist, it'll be a different process because you're writing it for someone else. But when you're working alone, so this was essentially like for part 3, basically the outline of the book. So part 3 of Shubeik Lubeik, this is it. Okay, it's 200-page graphic novel. So this is essentially the entire graphic novel in summary, like the themes, the things I want to put in. And then what I start doing is I start doing like thumbnails. So if you guys can see like the thumbnails here, I don't do a script, like a full script. I'll do my script visually, where I'll put in the panels and I sort of see it laid out so that I can imagine how people would read it. And you kind of, I mean, the dialogue for me is the last thing because it's really easy to edit words as opposed to editing drawings. But the thing is, even though I have everything laid out, and absolutely no one can read this except me, I still end up sometimes, like you'll see here, for example, I do this thing where I'll do an arrow and I'll do like +2. That means I'm adding 2 pages here. So as I go, I edit a lot of pages, but the more practiced you become with it, the less you have to edit as you go along because you sort of, from the beginning, imagine the pacing. Mainly what happens with comics is that you'll reach a page where you realize the pacing is off. Like, it's too fast. You got here too fast, or there's too much stuff happening in this page, and you need to spread out what was 1 page becomes like 5. And another thing people don't realize about comics is that a lot of times you have 2 pages facing each other. So let me try and find like a 2-page spread from Shubeik Lubeik. 1 second. I love having visual aids. So helpful. Okay, so this is a page where the 2 pages have to be facing each other. It's called a double page spread, or just a spread generally. So if you want to add 1 page, you actually have to add 2, because otherwise it would mess up the order. And that's something you just have to deal with. So actually, a lot of people feel like when they're making comics and they have to like draw something from the beginning, or like edit something, then they've made a mistake, like they're doing something wrong. But actually that is like, that's just making comics. Like you have to get used to drawing things over and over and sort of get used to that. It's a very like time-intensive work. It's not easy.
Yeah, I don't think I have anything else to add to what Deena said because I agree completely with her. One thing I will say is that people underestimate or don't understand how much work it takes to draw a comic. It looks so easy.
It doesn't.
Yeah, it looks so easy. But like, there's a hashtag on Twitter, sorry, RIP Twitter, but it's hashtag comics broke me. Have you guys followed this hashtag?
I'm afraid to.
But it's basically about like editors saying like, hey, can you like send me a 70-panel comic next Wednesday? And I'm just like, you have no idea what that means. Yeah. Like, first you have to write it, then you have to like sketch it, then you have to like interpret the writing into comic form and figure out the dialogue, and then draw it, and then color it, and then shade it, and then edit it. It's such a long process, and I feel like if anyone comes away with this, please know that drawing a graphic novel takes hundreds upon hundreds of hours of labor and carpal tunnel syndrome. And
I also got carpal
computer.
tunnel, so that's really real. You shouldn't
ulnar
get carpal
nerve
tunnel.
damage.
You have to stop. You have to like stop before you get carpal tunnel. So that is something we should not be.
Yeah.
Yes, you do not get carpal tunnel. You should have a good desk chair. That's really important.
Life-saving advice.
Yes. But also for Nora, specifically, if you are someone who works in illustration or design, sometimes you try to make a comic and you treat each panel as an illustration. And that's very bad, Nora. You should not do that. Anyone who works in illustration or anyone who draws, drawing for comics is not the same as drawing for illustration. In comics, you have to think of every panel as almost a word in a sentence, and the page is the sentence. So every panel is just sort of part of a bigger whole. It doesn't have to be, the panel itself doesn't have to be a work of art. It just has to help with the message or the point of the page. So you need to be more forgiving with yourself.
Yeah, that is good advice for anyone trying to break into comics.
Yes.
Or anyone who's broken into it accidentally by thinking it's the same as making an illustration.
It's not.
It's not. So thank you so much for that. There was something, so I remember reading something about your preference of working in black and white, and that for the second novel, you worked with a colorist. Toby Lee or Lee?
Toby Lee.
Lee. And Deena, your first two books, the third one has color.
They all have,
an intro with color.
Yeah.
So I wanted to hear a little bit more about your experience. Like, do you enjoy working with color? Does it feel like an added burden? What's your relationship with color?
Okay. I have so many thoughts about color. I hate color, first of all. But I think that when people look at a comic book, like let's say you're looking at like a Marvel comic or like a Superman comic, right? Like there's like, it looks a certain way. It's black and white first, then it's color, and then there's shading, and there's like lettering. You know, in traditional comics, there are separate people who do all those elements. They're specialists in color, they're specialists in shading, specialists in lettering, specialists in inking. There are some people who are really good at doing all of that, but it's so much labor to do each of those parts that, like, for me personally, I just like sketching. I like things to look as ugly as possible because I think that drawing ugly is the truest form of drawing. It's like the most real drawing. Like, it's the most emotional type of drawing. So if you look at my drawing style, it's very loose with very few lines because I'm interested in the economy of line, which is a term in cartooning where you use the least amount of lines to express the maximum emotion. And that is the artistry and the poetry of illustration to me, is to draw with few lines. And you know, like, oh, wow, she's angry in that drawing, but I didn't really draw much except for like a squiggle in the mouth, but you know she's pissed, you know? So I don't like drawing in color. I don't have the tools. I never drew with markers growing up. It was just an ink pen and paper. And then I had to learn to use a tablet. And I hired somebody to do both I Was Their American Dream and It Won't Always Be Like This to color it. And the first book has a red, white, and blue theme because it's about my relationship with being American. And the second book is, people always draw the Middle East in like these really muted tones of like sand and like pollution and like orange sky, and I wanted to not do that. I wanted to show Egypt to me is a very vibrant place. The Mediterranean is green blue. The sand in the ocean, the sand in the desert is golden yellow. The sky is blue. When you're in a lush area, it's really green. So I wanted to draw those colors and reflect the vibrancy of the Middle East, and I think that Toby Lee, the colorist, who just specializes in color, by the way, did a great job.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, cartooning is very much an emotive sort of process. You have to think of it more as what you want to represent and what emotion you want to evoke. So like storytelling, I mean, even just in writing, it's kind of just like trying to manipulate people's emotions. So you want them to feel a certain way when they're reading. So I think for me, my relationship with color, first of all, actually, I had a very, like I said, manipulative sense of color. We wanted the first part of the book to be in color because color just attracts people. So people just find it easier to read things in color. So when I was working on part 1 of Shubeik Lubeik, and as I said, I wanted to convince Egyptian readers to like pick it up and then keep reading. So the first few pages are supposed to be in color, but so because my background is in design and also I had been doing all this research on comics in Egypt, I knew a few things. So the first one was that printing in color is really expensive. And so if you print a really nice color book, no one's going to buy it because they won't be able to afford to. So you cannot have the whole book in color. So that was good from the beginning because it reduced the amount of work I had to do anyway. That was one thing I thought about. The second thing is that actually printing in color is also really risky. It's a risky game because sometimes the printers will not calibrate the colors well. And I have this problem with Shubeik Lubeik all the time, where I will sometimes go to the print shop and make sure that they're calibrating the colors correctly. And actually the third printing of the book, they really messed up the color pages, which are only a few pages at the beginning. But I remember I had a huge fight with them because I was like, every time at Cairo Comics, someone would come to me with like, El Tabat Talta, I would be like, you should go and ask them for a different print because this one is really bad. It's like the colors are off. They're printed wrong. The plates shifted, so they're sort of like really messy and you can barely read the words. But in some sense, actually, like when I was thinking of the design of Shubeik Lubeik, I was accounting for these weaknesses of Egyptian production and sort of the desire to keep it cheap. So I actually we chose the paper like a sort of a newspapery paper in Arabic. So that even if there are slight mistakes, they kind of feel like part of the book. So like kind of like a vintage sort of printing. Like, you know, even the old superhero or newspaper comics have like this sort of offset feeling. And even like the design of the cover is a little like 70s sort of graphic design. So it was because I had an awareness of what goes wrong and like how to kind of like make it as accessible as possible and as cheap as possible. But that's just more related as well to my background. And it's also partly because, I mean, in Egypt specifically, as opposed to printing abroad, you kind of have to be responsible for everything. So all of the best comics artists I talked to in Egypt, and specifically Shinnawi, who does Tuk Tuk, he's someone who's very meticulous about production and design, and he really taught me, like he does everything from A to Z when it comes to printing the book. And he really taught me that no one else is going to do that work in Egypt, unfortunately. Like there's no editors, there's no one really who will balance out this production. Now there is a few who are mainly comics artists who are now working in production. But at the time I was working on Shubeik Lubeik, especially because I was self-publishing it, so I was kind of making these decisions for myself. So when I was thinking of color, I was thinking, well, I want the introduction to be in color, and I want the rest of the book to be black and white because that makes the most sense. But actually in the Arabic version, you'll see that the first couple of pages are still black and white, and that's because we can only print color in 8 pages at a time. It's due to how the book is printed, so you can only do it in 8, so it can either be 8 pages, 16 pages, or 32 pages. And for part 3, before I started working on it, I told them I'm taking all 32 of my color pages because I had to do a really long introduction and I wanted it all to be in color. So I was really happy with part 3 because you can see like the colors are really, really vibrant, and it's partly because like when it was printing, I was like, I worked really hard on these pages, so I'm gonna go to the printer and make sure you guys are printing the colors properly. And the printer isn't too far from where I live, so it wasn't a problem. So it's like, it was more of a hands-on approach. But I think also due to printing necessities, so like when I was growing up, I was reading Tintin in Arabic, and if you ever read the Arabic version of Tintin, you'll see they have like 2 pages in color and 2 pages black and white to keep the cost down. It's completely unrelated to the art. They'll just have 2 pages black and white. And I was just used to it. Like to me, I thought like any good comic has to have a mix of color and black and white. That was how I was feeling. So it was definitely part of the process for Shubeik Lubeik. However, in English, they actually printed the whole book in color. So actually, even though the rest, like most of these pages are black and white, they're printed in 4 colors, which like I could have had the whole book in color, but obviously I'm not gonna color the book, it's 500 pages. But I thought it was really interesting how the budget changes when you're publishing abroad or you're publishing in Egypt. But most of my considerations were made for Egypt.
It's also 500 pages, so.
It is 500 pages. I mean, so is the Arabic, they're just separated. But yes. So.
Yeah, and it's very interesting how it's between preference, how to serve the storytelling in the case of your use of like blue and red in the first book, or sometimes just like production is a nightmare and you have to account for that.
It's partly to serve the storytelling too, though. Like for me, I envisioned the whole story in black and white, but I wanted the introductions to be vibrant to separate them from the main story, because I knew every book would have like a short introduction and the main story. So it's kind of both, but you sort of have to work within it from the beginning to know what you're allowed to do and not allowed to do.
That's so interesting that you're saying this. I thought that you did that to teach people how to have imagination about the world. So okay, I get it now. Like this is the color palette for the rest of the book. It sets the stage for how I should see in my mind what the story is supposed to look like.
that helps, yeah, also. I mean, definitely they know, like, yes, Egypt is not black and white. This is what the sky would look like, and this is what...
Yeah, that's how I translate the backgrounds, the background illustrations. So while working on a comic, again, not every panel is an illustration, so it's like a word in a sentence, as you said earlier. And I realized, and I imagine like both of you do that, you have the background, or like you said, the scene, and then the rest of the panels, it's like the person reading fills the blanks with what they know. So you could balance between these storytelling techniques, and at the same time, you're also making your life easier as a as an illustrator, as a comic artist. Yeah, this is very fascinating. You spoke earlier about translation, so you translated your book from Arabic to English, and in your case, you have words in Arabic in the middle.
Yes, and my book is also being translated. It has been translated into Arabic by a Saudi publisher, Mawzoon. Yeah. That's coming. It's coming soon.
Well, that is very exciting. Yeah. Did you have moments where, so you published your book first in the United States, right? Did you have moments where you thought, okay, I want to be authentic, naturally, but then you maybe worry about your audience not understanding a certain thing? Same thing with you, especially if you're translating from Arabic, the humor doesn't always work in English. So what was your experience with that? What were the challenges you faced that you could share with us?
So for my second book, there's a lot of Arabic that's untranslated. At first, I had my dad, I tried to have him do the targum, and it was not good. It was not good. Daddy, you did not do a good job targuming. And then I had Selma try doing some targum, and it was just, I mean, I think I needed to, like, I ended up paying for somebody to, a childhood friend of mine who now like actually works in Hollywood. She's Egyptian American, and she like works on the Aladdin movie. Her name is Randa Ragab. She has a consultancy where she people hire her to look at Arab content and basically tell them like what they did wrong, essentially. So I gave
her at the New York Times.
I know, they should. So I had her read my book, and she just like basically fixed everything. She was like, oh, that's like formal Arabic. People wouldn't say this. This is how you would say this. Also, like, she did cultural editing too. So like, I was drawing all the hijabs like in Egypt, black, for example. And she said, no, you need to add some like florals in there, some stripes, some colors, because we don't do that. And I was like, great. She also like pointed out like you have all these like men with beards frowning. You need to make some men with beards happy, so that you can show that like, you know, we get break some stereotypes here about like Arab people. And so she was really great. And because I didn't grow up in the Arab world. Ooh, there's my baby. Oh. There he is, Gus over there, my husband. Because I didn't grow up in the Arab world, one of the things I was really afraid of was like perpetuating stereotypes about my own people. So she was like a good traffic guard. She was like, ooh, I wouldn't do that. Like, you're right, let's change it.
That is a great answer, especially because if you grow up in a culture, you know that it's not, you know, you might see something and be like, I know that's not how it is. Yeah. You know, but maybe someone else would not get that. So that is a very wise decision.
Yeah. I mean, that's part of what I mean by how you sort of have the audience perception, where if you were writing this for like an Egyptian audience, you might not be so scared about perpetuating stereotypes because they're Egyptians. I mean, they might be like, things don't look like that, but they understand that this is how you remember them looking, as opposed to if you're writing it for an American audience, you have to be like, okay, well, I'm not perpetuating stereotypes for you because you don't know what the reality is. So for me, some things were already made easier when I finished, because I published it in Arabic at first, so I wasn't thinking about the translation at all. And I did that on purpose because I wanted to stop thinking about Western readers completely. I was just like, I'm not dealing with this right now. I'm just going to finish it in Arabic. I'll do it in Arabic for Egyptian readers. And then I'll deal with the translation as a separate like element completely. Which was very good when I was working on the Arabic, but then when I started working on the English, it was the worst time of my life. So I really regretted all the decisions I had made when I was working on the English translation, because the Arabic books, you know, a lot of people read them and they say, عجبني قوي الجو المصري، كتاب مصري قوي، ازاي عرفتي تخليه مصري كده. It's like there's a lot of decisions that were made to make it very, very familiar to Egyptians, and it's partly because of the cartooning too. Some people might not care about this very much, but for me, I know like Egyptians actually recognize art style. So if you draw something that's too American or something that's too even Japanese, like in a too much of a manga style, people can feel that it's foreign. They feel like they'll understand what you've been reading, but they'll say, oh, this person was influenced by that. So in order to kind of keep it somewhere neutral, where people can read it and not feel like it's foreign, you have to be careful of how you draw people. Like you said, it's a lot to do with not just the economy and the line, but the expression of emotion. So because Egyptian comics are mostly related to political cartoons or caricature, people really love exaggerated features. They love exaggerated sort of, almost like a little bit of ugliness in the art, like you, exactly as you said, to make it feel more emotional and the ability to like balance the emotiveness of the characters with the realism of the background, so that it feels like it's set in Egypt, like they can understand that. That's fine, that translates fine. The dialogue doesn't at all. The dialogue is very Egyptian, which is also a benefit of comics, is that you can write in dialect. If you write books in like proper prose, you do have to use a lot more fusha because it's just part of the tradition. I think there's a big resistance to having books fully written in dialect. It's seen as like unprofessional and uneducated. But with comics, people are a lot more forgiving. So when I was translating it into English, one of the ways I dealt with it was by turning the narrator in Arabic to like a translator. So like the narrator, so I read a lot of translated manga, so like things that are translated by fans, like scanlations. And I really like the approach that fan translators have, where they will just make a footnote and explain everything. They'll be like, this means that. Like it's kind of a meme of like how people translate very literally. But I like it because when I'm reading, it means that I learn what a word means. Like it's almost like you stop. So if you, for the first time you say, oh, this person said inshallah. Inshallah means, you know, in my book I said inshallah means no, but in other places it means like God willing. But in other places, then when you use it again, the reader knows already what it means and you don't need to keep translating it. So I kind of use that approach where I would have footnotes that the translator explains, but the translator explains it kind of like with a sense of humor, because they're also the narrator. And it kind of worked. What really helped is that the book in English is printed from right to left. So like it stays, it's not like flipped for English. Oh, yeah. So it stays from right to left in the English. And because of that, when people start reading it, they already have the feeling that it's a translation. So it's the same as when they read manga, they don't have this expectation that they should understand everything. It's almost like they're visiting as a tourist. And I think when people enter a book with that mindset, it makes them so much more open-minded. Instead of feeling like I should be able to understand everything, they're just like kind of like exploring. They're just like, oh, that's new, I learned a new thing. So I think a lot of it has to do with the like experience of reading and just even the tactile experience of like holding the book. It just creates a different mindset.
That is fascinating. Yeah, because while I was reading the English, I was like, oh, okay, that's how you're doing that. Or also, if you're translating and there's a sentence in Arabic in your English book, it reads as Arabic, and then you have to translate to Arabic, suddenly it's in Arabic. Right, and you have that in your book where there are sentences in English because the second book, the person is a student at a university, and he's studying in English. They're studying in English, and yeah. So how do you deal with that? And so it's really interesting to hear both of your answers on that. Cool, thank you. So something else I had in mind. What lessons did you take from your first book or your first and your second book into the second or third? So when you're working on your first book, obviously it's a new experience. What is the thing that you carried with you that was, other than obviously that you started with drawing with your first one?
Yeah, I think that the biggest thing two things. One is that I took time off of work to do the book full time because it really needed a lot of like focus to work on it every day. I couldn't do it after work the whole time because I was burning myself out because comics broke me, right? So I learned that I have to take time off to do my work. It deserves a break. It deserves that. My work deserves the time. The second thing that I did was that I watched some YouTube videos about how to sit properly at a desk when you draw, especially on a tablet. So, you know, when you go to art school, which I didn't go to art school because my parents wouldn't let me, when you go to art school, you're taught how to formally like sit and like paint on like an easel, right? In a way that you can draw for a long period of time. And I didn't learn that, so I was like drawing really badly. Like on my first book, I was like kind of drawing like this or like drawing like this. And so this time I watched videos about how to sit at a desk, where my legs should be, with the height of my table, the angle that my tablet should be on the table, and then how I should hold the stylus. Apparently, you don't press hard, which was what I was doing. I was like drawing like this. You adjust the settings on your stylus so that when you draw in a light way, you can still have a lot of pressure. So don't press down. I wore a glove so to protect the skin on the outside of my hand from constant rubbing against the surface. So I wore a glove, and then I took breaks to stretch my hand every now and then. I learned that all from YouTube, and I actually had my husband take photos of me and the way that I was sitting at my desk, so I knew that I was sitting in the proper way. So I think that helped a lot, personally. So I did that. I mean, I don't know. Who knows? But
No,
it helped,
100% valid.
Yeah.
The first big project I worked on, I ended up at the physiotherapist, couldn't move my neck for 2 weeks.
oh no,
That's
awful.
So that is a great lesson to take forward.
It is really important. Also, getting a good desk chair is really important. Yeah. And it's really stressful. There's a lot of desk chairs in the world, so you have to research really, really well. I think for my first book, I was self-publishing. So I was talking about all the stuff I was explaining to you guys about. I would go buy the paper and do all of that stuff, and it was part-time. So it was like Malak said, it was something I was doing. Like the first book took maybe 3 years to come out with Dora Mahrusa because I was just not working on it all the time. I was doing originally it was 50 pages, and then I added 30 pages for Cairo Comics, and then another 30 pages with Dora Mahrusa. And then I sold a translation, and because when you sell a translation in the United States, the way they publish is slightly different, so they give you an advance so you can work on the book at your own pace, especially if you get paid in America and live in Egypt. So I was able to take full time off or just work full time on the comics, and that's partly what made me want to do a good job. I was just okay, I'm being paid to just work on this, so I have to do a really good job. I have to do I have to work as well as I can. So for parts 2 and 3, there was a lot of stuff that I sort of just did more easily because I was used to it. I will say part 2 is when I got carpal tunnel. But that's just because I had a really tight deadline. I was trying to publish it in time for Cairo Comics. And I ended up drawing, I think there was a day where I drew 22 pages in one day. So that's something I will never do again.
Also, I have a 5-page limit for a day, so 22 pages is a lot.
No, it was insane. But in fairness, they were sort of not very full pages. However, after that, I did get carpal tunnel, and it was not a good experience. And after that, for part 3, I took a much longer time, and I had a good desk chair. And also, it was because of COVID that gave me a little bit of extra time, so that's why part 3 has so many pages with a lot of details. If you look at part 3, I have to find my most detailed page, which is
there was one with
the one with the buildings. This is a page that has a lot of buildings. Buildings take a lot of time to draw. So it was partly just because of COVID that I was able to kind of just take my time with certain pages. So it was mostly just the lessons of time and experience. So you just get more comfortable as time goes on, and then you forget it all for the next project. That's just how it works.
Yeah, and you learn it all over again. Thumbnails, for example, is something I personally tend to skip.
I skip thumbnails.
No, you should never skip thumbnails.
Oh no.
Neither of you. Thumbnails are really important.
Yeah. I worry about it after I finish. I'm it'll be I know, it's horrible. It's horrible. Don't do that. Draw thumbnails.
They're the beginning. You can't do them after you finish.
I'll do that. I'll remember that for my 3rd book.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
I draw the thumbnails for the first 3 spreads, and then I'm but I'm really excited to ink, so I start inking before I'm done with the thumbnailing.
That's what I did.
This is such a mistake. I'm sorry. If you start inking, there's something I call the inking walk of shame, where I'll start inking without doing thumbnails and penciling first, and then it turns out horribly, and then I have to start all over again, and I call that the walk of shame back, when you just start the page over because you ink too fast. So you guys need to focus on your thumbnails.
This is a reality check for both of us, it seems.
Yes.
Absolutely.
I have 500 pages, okay? It's a lot. You need thumbnails. Yes.
Should we have time for audience questions?
I believe so. Someone was... Oh, yes. Well, yes, right. We have audience questions. First of all, thank you guys so much.
Thank you, Nora.
Does anyone have questions? Yes.
Thank you all for this wonderful window you opened to people who are not in this area. I've enjoyed comics in the sense that beyond caricature that you talked about, Deena. So I have a question particularly for Deena, but also Malaka, if you could answer. Any regrets that you had about the book after you finished? Like, what would you have done differently? You know, because it seems like it's such an intense and deep process. There must have been places where you go back and you think, I wish I made this character this way or that way. I'm just curious.
Yeah, I have a lot of regrets. I haven't read my book since it got published in September 2022. So this is for, it won't always be like this. So first of all, like my stepmother was like one of the main characters in the book. And it's about my developing relationship with my stepmother over 15 years, from age 11 to 25. Yeah, say it, Gus. And I didn't develop her storyline very well. Like, I think that I dipped in and out of her character instead of writing a through line. And so, in the end, like, when Hala's story resolves, Hala's the name of my ex-stepmother, when Hala's story evolves, like, at the end, it doesn't, I feel like, and of course, I'm my own biggest critic, right? I don't feel that the reader gets a satisfying resulting feeling from Hala's motives in the book. So that irks me every time I look at the book. I'm just like, oh, the ending. Oh. I cringe. So that's the first mistake. The second mistake was just something that Deena's ink of shame is now thinking about. So my dad, I'm going to out you, Dad. You told. This is so mean. You said next book, hire another artist to draw it for you. And I was like, Dad, that's like the meanest thing that you could say to me. But honestly, when I look at the book, I mean, like, he's not wrong. Some of the lines were really sloppy. And like, sometimes like the character is supposed to be like 16 in the image, but they look more like 11. Because I was using the same style of drawing my 11-year-old me as my 16-year-old me, or like my hands are off. And like, I probably should have thumbnailed first, and maybe that would have helped. But the inking was just like, I think I was tired, and I was like, I don't give a shit. This is the best I can do. Whatever, I don't care. Like, and I just like draw and like get it done attitude. So drawings are a little sloppy. I was thinking in my mind, like, Toby will fix it with color. Toby's the colorist. He'll fix it.
To fix it in post of comics.
He'll fix it in post. He'll add shading and it'll look interesting, you know, like, or sometimes I just got sort of lazy in the drawing process. But it was also because I was like burned out and tired and like, I don't know if I should be saying all this, but those are my regrets. These are my regrets for the book. Yeah.
No, that's very real. I mean, it definitely happens. And I would have had the same, but I had a cheat, which is that the first book was published 3 times. So the first time with Cairo Comics, I got a lot of feedback from people. So I was able to see what people were missing or what wasn't working out. And then for like this, by the time I published it with Dora Mahrusa, I had so many passes at it and I had fixed so many like little things that I wanted to fix. The essence of the story stayed the same, but I had the fortune to be able to fix it again. And then when I translated it into English, I had the 4th time I was able to revise it. So that first book was revised like 4 times to come out in the English. So that's why for the English readers, they get kind of like the extended, revised, fixed in post editions like the Lord of the Rings DVD.
The most perfect version.
Yes, the most perfect version. But that was the first book because it was my first try and it was different. The second book, I did have that time crunch that some of the things did come out a little sloppy. And those were a few of the things I fixed for the English version. Very few. And I also added like a couple pages for the English version. For the English in the first book, I added like maybe 10 pages. But there are more things that like an extended version, like if I had the chance, I would have added anyway. So it's like a little bit of like Easter egg almost. It doesn't change the story, it just adds a little bit to it. And then actually the third book, I did not change it, but that's because I spent so much time at it and I was more experienced by the time I reached the third book. So I knew as I was drawing, I knew I can do better than this. And then because of COVID, I had the time, so I was like, fine, I will do better than this. So I would just go back and like give it my all in every page. So it was mainly for books 1 and 2. So I cheated basically. So I don't really have regrets with this because it was published so many times. Like by the time I reached, honestly, the English version, I was like, I've been publishing this book for 6 years. And also, even after the English version was printed in America, it took a whole year to be in bookstores. So by the time it came out, I was just like, I mean, it's out now. Like it's been out to me forever. So it was like having to regain the excitement for it over again. Like it was a process. So it happens to everyone, but I was just lucky in the sense that I just had so many opportunities to fix it.
That's great, and it shows.
Thanks. I'm glad. It worked out. Yes.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
Hi, my name is Nahed. I'm an author and publisher for children's books. And actually, lately we have received a text that was very conversational. So we decided that we're going to introduce comics to children, 7 years old, 8 years old. And one of the things, that was our first book, comics for children. I remember I read Lulu and Tabush and Superman when I was young. It was black and white, and I enjoyed it so much. So I decided, okay, let us do this for our children in Arabic. And it is Arabic. And the illustrator is Arabic. So what we have experienced through this experience was very complex. Because the illustrator was good at doing comics and she had experience in that, this is what made it easy. But one of the things I want to ask is do you think that we can introduce comics to children 7 years old, 8 years old? And are there any criteria of text that you, as an illustrator, you are keen to see? Because I remember for each window we had to do some explanation to the illustrator. We're expecting this, we're moving from here to here, there's a window here. But she was good. She was able to even add more windows to explain transformation from one window to another or from one place to another. So I'm just looking for any input when it comes to what are the criteria you are looking for as an illustrator when it comes to the text that you would receive and how to use it and implement it and understand it to become a nice, understandable
I'd love to answer this question. First of all, comics for children is one of the fastest growing genres in the United States. One of the leaders in this space is an artist named Raina Telgemeier. And she wrote the book Gut. Was it Gut? Gut, yes, Gut. So Raina Telgemeier, you need to follow her and see her work because it's the most shining example of what we have for comics for children in this time. Every time she goes to a comics festival in the United States, it's packed. The room is packed. There's like 200 kids in the audience. Everyone loves her. So I'd say that it's a great direction that you're going in. Second thing, there are not a lot of comics editors out there. So you probably are working in a publishing house where you have a lot of editors who are working for you, and it's new for them to have the experience of working with a comics artist. So us comics artists, I think from my perspective, I've had to teach editors how to edit comics. So they don't know, usually they're an editor of writing, prose, right? So they know how to edit writing, but now they need to be editing for visuals and prose, 2 elements, and dialogue as well. And so I always have a sit down as an artist. I'll have a sit down with the editor and say, you know what? Here's how I want to work. First, I'm going to give you an outline of the comic, and then I'll make thumbnails. But before I even move to the next point, I want you to edit the outline first and make sure that it is what you want. Because I'm not going to sit down and ink until you, editor, knows exactly what I'm drawing. Because there is nothing worse than an editor who doesn't know how to edit comics, to then look at the inked version and say like, oh, I don't like that. Can you change it? I want to rip their head off. So make sure that at the very, very beginning, when you have the outline, everybody knows, everyone's edited it, everyone said yes, then you go to the thumbnails, okay, it looks good. Then you go to the sketches, okay, it looks good. And then you ink, very last. But don't make them ink first, because you're missing a lot of things along the
الانكينج
way.
اللي هو التحبير يعني ان ما يبقاش الصفحه خلصانه من الاول لازم يبقى الاديتنج على الرصاص او على الاوتلاين ايوه exactly so
Even the writing first.
yeah writing first obviously yeah I completely agree with everything Malaka said you just need good editors who also like for the people writing the script sometimes they write the script as if it's a script but actually a comic script is a message from the writer to the artist. It doesn't have to be in the form of a script. So sometimes the best scripts actually have pictures. They'll say, I imagine it in الصورة يبقى فيها كذا ويبقى لابس كذا. It's going to look in a certain way and I want the character to be wearing this and they can attach pictures, they can explain it very informally. So it's more of a message between the scriptwriter and the artist as opposed to a formal script. It has to be communicative so the artist can understand it clearly. Yes.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Do we have time for one more question?
Yes.
All right. All right, one more question. Hello.
Hi, thank you so much, first of all, and I'd love to know what you're working on next.
I'm working on a movie.
Wow.
I'm working on a movie. I think that graphic novelists actually are really good at writing movies because it's the same thing, right? No, just kidding. But it's like a visual and word medium, right? Similarly, and there's also thumbnails involved, and storyboarding, and so it's a high school comedy about a Filipino-American girl. It's original. It's not based on any of my books, but it sounds very similar. It's called Posers, and it's a high school comedy about a Filipino-American girl growing up in Southern California where there's nobody who's white. Everybody's Asian, because it's an Asian community. And we have this white-worshipping teenager who wants so badly to get into a group called Punk White Group. And she realizes that the person who she loves the whole time is her best friend, Howard, who is Taiwanese and goth. So anyways, that's the book. I knew you'd like that, Salma.
Great. And Deena?
I'm trying to work on a new book as well. It will take a long time because I'm also working on a lot of things. But I'm definitely attached to long form work, so I'm trying to also work on a book and then I will maybe be releasing it in smaller chapters in Arabic first. So, same formula. I'm very carefully not telling you what it's about because it's still a little
We won't ask.
undefined, but hopefully I'll be able to announce it soon. Yes, it's I think I'm very lucky with where I get to be in comics, so it's not something I want to give up, but it's also a very time-consuming and unexciting thing to announce. It's like, I have a book, you will see it in 5 to 6 years.
Oh yeah, this movie isn't real. It's just a screenplay, so don't even expect anything.
No, it's exciting. We're expecting. It's too late.
We are. Because it's similar to the worlds you fleshed out in your stories.
It's very similar to I Was Their American Dream.
I want to be in that world now. I want to hear more about it. Very excited. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you for coming.
Thank you for coming.
Nora.
Yes.
Thank you. I have a few things I need to say. So
Right.
there will be a book signing in the lobby, and I'd like to thank you guys first for coming. Thank you so much. The AV team, volunteer and translators, our title sponsor Emirates Airlines, founding partner Dubai Culture, parent organization Emirates Literature Festival, and foundation, and session sponsors, and the speakers, of course. Thank you.
Thank you, Nora. Thank you.
I would have memorized this, but I know I would have forgotten something, so thank you so much.